Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today we will discuss about queer studies. Queer studies is an interdisciplinary academic field that explores the complex intersections of gender, sexuality, identity, culture, power, and society. Emerging as a response to rigid binaries in sexuality and gender, like heterosexual, homosexual, male, female, it interrogates normative structures, challenges the naturalization of identities, and offers new ways of reading literature, law, society, and history. Key focus areas: the socially constructed nature of sexual and gender identities, deconstructing heteronormativity and cisnormativity, questioning essentialist identity politics, analyzing power relations embedded in language, culture, and institutions, valuing fluidity, ambiguity, anti-normativity, and performativity, engagement with intersectionality, class, race, religion, geography, and a disability in relation to queerness. Now let's analyze the origins and evolution of queer studies. Historical context, early roots. The sexology studies of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, for example, Magnus Hartsfield, Havelock Ellis, etc. Psychoanalysis of Freud and Lacan, with an early discourse on same-sex desire, repression, and the unconscious. Next stage, activist movements. Stonewall Riots 1969 marked the beginning of modern LGBTQ plus rights movements. Then AIDS crisis in the 1980s urged a political awakening and a critique of state inaction and medical discrimination. Academic emergence in the 1990s. Coined by Teresa de Lauretis in 1990s, queer theory was proposed as a post-identity, anti-normative mode of critique. Reaction against gay and lesbian studies that were too assimilationist or based on fixed identities. Informed by post-structuralism, feminism, Marxism, psychoanalysis, post-colonialism, and a deconstruction. Now let's analyze the key foundational thinkers and their works coming under queer studies. First of all, we have Judith Butler, whose work Gender Trouble, 1990s, Gender as Performative, Destabilizing Identity. Next, we have Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick, whose work Epistemology of the Closet, 1990s, challenged binaries, introduced the closet metaphor. Then we have Mikhail Foucault, The History of Sexuality, 1976-1984. Sexuality as a Social Construct, Power-Knowledge Nexus. Next we have Teresa de Lauretis, whose work Queer Theory, Lesbian and Gay Sexualities, coined the term queer theory, post-identity approach. Next we have Michael Warner, whose work Fear of a Queer Planet, 1993, positioned queerness as a political and cultural critique. Next we have Lauren Barland and Lee Edelman. Sex or the Unbearable is the work written by Lauren Barland and Lee Edelman. Queer Negativity and the Reproductive Politics. Now let's analyze the core concepts and terminologies related to queer studies. First of all, queer, reclaiming term for non-normative identities, also a verb, that is to queer. Gender performativity. Gender is not innate, but a repeated socially compelled act. Next term, heteronormativity. That is, the assumption that heterosexuality is the natural default orientation. Next term, homonormativity. Critique of LGBTQ plus assimilation to heteronormative values, monogamy, etc. Intersectionality, coined by Kimball Crenshaw. Identities intersect, race, class, sexuality, etc. The closet, a metaphor for hiding one's queer identity, central to queer narratives. Next term, camp is aesthetic of irony, exaggeration, parody, and a gender play. Queer temporality disrupts linear life paths, marriage, reproduction. Judith Halberstam. Queer futurity. Utopian visions beyond the present norms. For example, Jos Esteban Munoz. Now let's talk about the developments and the subfields of queer studies. Expanding the field, transgender studies. Susan Stryker's work, Gender History. Jack Halberstam's work, Female Masculinity. Asexual studies. Sarankowski and Milk's work, Asexualities, Feminist and a Queer Perspectives. Queer disability studies. Robert McRuer's work, Crip Theory. Queer of Color Critique. Roderick Ferguson's Munoz, Kathy Cohen, etc. Global queer studies. Non-Western discourses on sexuality like Hijra communities in India, Bakla in the Philippines, Two-Spirit in indigenous cultures. Post-colonial queer scholarship, that is Gopinath Rao, Anjali Arondkar. South Asian, Ruth Banit and Salim Kirwai, whose work Same-Sex Love in India. Relevance and the social context of queer studies. Activism and politics. Queer studies interface with feminism, anti-racism, disability justice, decolonial movements. Critique of systems like marriage, military inclusion, consumerism, and healthcare exclusion. Central to protests against transphobia, conversion therapy, gender policing, media erasure. Education and policy. Push for inclusive curricula. Queer pedagogy challenges classroom binaries and encourages a radical democratic engagement. Literary significance and contributions and literary criticism. Queer readings of canonical texts reveal hidden desires, repressed sexuality, and subversive interpretations. For example, Shakespeare's sonnets as homoerotic, Melville's work, Billy Budd, Oscar Wilde's The Pictures of Dorian Gray, Henry James' The Turn of the Screw. Genres queer include memoirs, Alison Bechdel's work Fun Home, graphic novels like Tilly Walden's Spinning, experimental fiction like Jeanette Binderson's work Written on the Body. Now let's talk about the contemporary authors and queer studies. James Baldwin's work Giovanni's Room, that it discusses black queer identity, exile, etc. Next writer, Ocean Vuong, whose work On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous discusses themes like immigrant, queer trauma, and beauty. Next writer, Carmen Maria Machado, work In the Dream House discusses queer domestic abuse memorial. Next writer, Saeed Jones, whose work How We Fight for Our Lives discusses a certain black queer coming of age work. The next writer, Leslie Finberg, Stone Butch Blues discusses a trans-masculine experience, labor struggle. Next writer, Shyam Selvadurai, whose work Funny Boy talks about a queer adolescence in Sri Lanka. Now let's talk about the critiques and internal debates about queer studies. The issue, theory versus activism, and the debate is over the question, is queer theory too abstract and academic? The next issue, Western centrism. How to center non-Western queer lives and epistemologies. Post-identity versus identity politics. Should queerness be fixed for legal rights or fluid philosophically? The next issue is about inclusion. Whose queerness gets visibility, white, urban, or males? The next issue is commodification. Risk of queer culture being absorbed by neoliberal market logic. So overall, queer studies is more than an academic field. It is a radical mode of inquiry and resistance. It interrogates normativity, disrupts binaries, and reclaims marginalized narratives. From literature to law, film to policy, it reconfigures what counts as knowledge, questions who is represented, and imagines freer, plural futures beyond the dominant ideologies.